So ripening mangoes and papayas. These are major mango cultivars that we see in the market. Just a bit of trivia for you. All of these except one are actually Florida varieties. Ataulfo is from Mexico. The rest of these all came from Florida, so even though Florida has a pretty insignificant industry now, it's been a source of some of the major varieties. Hayden is actually the oldest of those. It's well over 100 years old. The papaya types, we see the solo types. That's mostly what you see coming from Hawaii, right? And the Marabdal type are the bigger ones that come from the Caribbean. We grow those in Florida also. The mango board actually has a maturity and ripeness guide, and there were some of these available in the other room. This picture up in the upper right is actually the new version that's going to be available any day now. Actually, I think they sort of made a mistake. They asked a bunch of scientists to review it, and of course we gave them opinions, so now it's being revised. But it's going to be available anytime now. But mango harvest maturity is based on internal color development. And as you heard someone say yesterday, actually some varieties stay green on the outside all the way through ripening. So the way they look on the outside is not a good indicator. You have to actually cut them open to see how ripe they are. Typically we say that stage 2 here is the minimum. Like if you think in terms of tomatoes, a stage 2 mango is sort of like a breaker tomato. It's where you first see the red color, but it's on the outside of a tomato. On a mango, it's the inside. And then the corresponding firmness and bricks or soluble solids content you can see underneath each of those stages. Immature mangoes stage 1 mangoes can be mature or they might be immature. It's really difficult to tell whether a green mango is really fully mature, and that's a big problem. So when you harvest at that stage, there's a chance that some number of those fruit are going to be immature, and then they're never going to be able to ripen to good quality. So that's why stage 2 is recommended as the minimum. So papaya harvest maturity is related to external color development. They should be at least quarter yellow, which is the left side there. It's better if they're more advanced. You heard Florence talk about muskmelons, cantaloupes, right? They're a climacteric fruit that doesn't get sweeter, even though physiologically it can ripen normally off the plant, because that's what climacteric fruit do. It doesn't accumulate starch that can be converted to sugar during ripening off the plant. So papayas don't get any sweeter than whatever they had in them at the time they were harvested. And if you have fully green papayas, it's the same story as with mangoes. They might ripen okay, but there's a good chance that they're not going to ever develop great flavor, because you don't know if they were really fully mature or not, and they definitely won't have as much sugar in them as if you had left them on the tree longer. So what are the changes associated with mango and papaya ripening? You got color changes, of course, loss of chlorophyll, which is the green color, increased carotenoids, which are the yellow and orange colors. The skin color may change, like I mentioned. The flesh color definitely changes from greenish yellow to yellow or orange, so that's the synthesis of those carotenoids. You have textural changes, decrease in firmness, but also very importantly, juiciness, mouthfeel change. Compositional changes include the starch conversion to sugars in mangoes, but not in papayas, as I mentioned. Increase in soluble solids content, or bricks, in mango, but not in papaya. Increase in characteristic aroma volatiles, and you've heard how important those are. A lot of times you hear people say, oh, this fruit is tasteless. Well, really, it's not taste, it's the aroma that's lacking that causes people to have that reaction. It's very important in terms of the flavor and the appreciation of the flavor of fruits. So how do you determine when to harvest these? With mangoes, it's actually primarily the shape of the fruit that they're looking for when they're picking them. So an immature mango is somewhat flat, and then it develops what they call shoulders. It gets more rounded at the top, and that's an indicator that a mango is fully mature, is when it develops that shape. Now, the days after flowering sort of tells you when to go into the mango field and start testing for maturity. The external color may or may not help. Specific gravity and dry matter. The dry matter can actually be measured by near-infrared instruments, like you heard about that with the instrumental demonstrations yesterday, and Felix has an instrument for that. It flashes very strong light that actually goes into the interior of the fruit and measures what is reflected back, and it can correlate that with the dry matter in the mangoes. For destructive, there's flush color, flush firmness, soluble solids content, titratable acidity, dry matter. All of those are things that change with ripening, and so they can be measured. And of course, like I mentioned with papayas, it's the color break that you're looking for. So if you measure the changes in color in a mango, you get a change from like a greenish, creamy color to a yellowish color to a more orange color. And with the instrument, it's measured like this. You get a hue angle, and the angle is going around the equator of this color sphere. So by convention, the red on the far right, that's 0, and you go around counterclockwise, and 90 degrees is yellow, and 180 degrees is green. So if you look again at these numbers, just looking at Tommy Atkins, I've got a picture to follow this. It's going from 94 about, so that's that greenish hue. It's yellowish green, and then it goes down to 89, 87, 82, 80. So it's all in the yellow towards orange color. So of course between yellow and red is orange. And these are the actual fruit that those numbers came from. So that's what it looks like. The pictures and the data here actually comes from a study done in Guatemala by a colleague, Fernando Maul, and the updated one, the Mango Board commissioned people from Mexico and other production areas, so they have more representative numbers for color and firmness. So here's the firmness, and you see the firmness is starting here. Actually, one of the things they've changed is to increase the firmness values for stage 1 and stage 2, but you can see it declining, so the fruit are softening. And the important thing is stage 4 or stage 5, which is where you could eat a mango, it's in the range of like 2 to 6 or 7 pounds using that 8mm probe with the penetrometer. Soluble solids. The soluble solids of an unripe mango are going to be typically like 6, 7, 8 degrees or percent. But then as the starch is converted to sugar, as they ripen, it goes up. So you see it going 10, 12, 13. 15 or 16 is a really good quality mango. I would say 12 is like a minimum that's going to have good sweetness. Sometimes you see them in the market lower than that, and that's a pretty good indication that it was a fruit that was harvested too early. So really you're looking for that range, like 12 to 16 would be. You agree, Dennis? That would be a good mango. So optimal temperatures for mango ripening. Like a lot of fruit, they'll ripen over a very wide range of temperatures. And like I said yesterday when I was talking about temperature, there's an optimum temperature where you get the best combination of all the different sensory features. So for mangoes, it's interesting that if they're ripened at the lower end of the range, 60 to 65 Fahrenheit, you can actually get better color development than at higher temperatures. If you go too high, you can start to get mottled appearance and very strong flavor. And actually, like in some places where mangoes come from, India, for example, they normally ripen mangoes at ambient temperatures, which are quite high, in the 80, 90 degrees easily, and they have very strong flavor. But for most American consumers, around 68 to 72 Fahrenheit gives you the best combination of color and aroma and flavor. So that's what we recommend for mangoes. And then the firmness, as I was mentioning before, firm, ripe, 6 to 10 pounds that's about the stage that I would say you should send them to the retail stores, and then they're ready to eat as they drop below that. A stage 4 mango, 2 to 6 pounds, that's probably where most people would like to eat a mango. At stage 5, some of you would probably say that's overripe, but some people really like soft mangoes where they can almost suck the flesh out from a hole in the peel even. I had one guy from Nicaragua who especially liked to do that. So these are the ripening recommendations actually from the mango board, and they separate them into hot water treated versus non-hot water treated fruit. And the reason is, like I mentioned yesterday, that hot water treatment is 46 degrees centigrade or 115 Fahrenheit. So they heat the fruit up to that temperature, and then they have to cool them down eventually to 12 C or which is about 55 Fahrenheit. And that time that they're cooling down, they're going through the ripening range, right? So the hot water treated mangoes tend to have a little bit of a jump ahead of non-hot water treated fruit in how fast they ripen. And typically they don't really need ethylene treatment to ripen because they're already a step ahead of the game in that regard. So what you need to do is bring the fruit into that 68 to 72 degree range. If you apply ethylene, it's probably not going to do anything because the fruit are already producing their own ethylene, like climacteric fruit do, but it won't hurt if it's there. And then they should ripen in 2 to 6 days, and you can just monitor the firmness until they get into the firm ripe range, and that's probably where you should send them to the store. And if they're non-hot water treated, ethylene at 100 parts per million for 24 hours will usually do the trick. Yeah?
How long are they kept in the water? Is it just dipped in or kept in long?
The hot water treatment, they're actually immersed in that water for from 60 minutes to 110 minutes, depending on the size of the fruit. The bigger the fruit, the longer they have to be in, because the treatment has to get a temperature of 42 at the seed level, so all the way through the flesh in order to kill any insect eggs or larvae. So they're actually in that hot water for quite a long time. And so when they come out, they're at the water temperature all the way through. They're very warm. Yes?
How do you know when mango is water treated or not?
It'll be on the boxes because they actually have to have a stamp from USDA APHIS that it's a certified facility that did the hot water treatment. So you'll see that on the cartons. Oh, actually, let me point out, this is the mango handling and ripening protocol, which is also next door. There's copies of that, and that also is being revised now. Okay, for papayas. So, fruit temperature for papayas, it's the same story. They'll ripen over a fairly wide range, but they actually ripen best at a little bit higher temperature. Typically between 72 and 82 Fahrenheit, and usually we recommend like 72 to 77 is the right temperature for papayas. And I remembered actually that Dennis, again, I keep pointing you out through my whole talk, he made the point that if you're using a banana ripening room, sometimes they have high temperature alarms programmed into them, and it's typically like 68 degrees, right? So you have to make sure you override that before you're ripening mangoes and papayas, because it's going to be that temperature or higher. So the best temperature for papayas is 72 to 82 or more, 72 to 77. So papayas, we're recommending that they already have started ripening before you pick them. That's the color break, the yellow color. So they will respond to ethylene even so, because what ethylene does typically is it has a greater effect the less mature or less ripe the fruit is. So what it's basically doing is it's causing the lower maturity or less ripe fruit to catch up with the more advanced fruit that are already producing their own ethylene, and you end up with everything ripening more uniformly because of that, instead of them being scattered over. So you apply ethylene, 100 parts per million, for 24 to 48 hours, monitor the color development, and by the time they're about half ripe, half colored, they're ready to move on. This is a picture, an example of what ethylene can do with papayas. On the left, you have papayas held at room temperature, which was 25 C in this case, 77 Fahrenheit, for 3 days. And these are papayas from the same lot that were held at the same temperature with 100 parts per million ethylene, and you can see what the ethylene did. It got all of them to very uniform, full color. Other considerations. Optimal relative humidity is typically 90 to 95%. It's basically as high as you can keep it without having the problem of condensation occurring. Why would condensation occur at higher temperatures? Because the temperature in a room actually fluctuates a little bit, and there's a dew point temperature for any humidity at a given temperature. So if the temperature dips below the dew point, the air can't hold all of the water vapor, and some of it will condense. And if you get condensation on cartons and things like that are on the fruit, you can get decay. On the cartons, it's going to weaken them. So you keep it as high as you can without having any condensation, and that's typically 90 to 95%. And that pretty much goes across all of the fruit that we're going to be talking about. Ethylene concentration is important, but also, as you heard mentioned yesterday, keeping the CO2 from building up too high is also important, because it is a competitive inhibitor of ethylene, and it'll negate the ethylene effect if you let it build up too high. After triggering the ripening, you hold them at that ripening temperature. They should finish ripening. Mangoes in 5 to 9 days, papayas in 8 to 14 days. And then once they're ripe, they can actually be kept at a lower temperature than the unripe fruit were being kept at. So that's the chilling injury thing that you heard about yesterday. And that's all I have. I think I've got us about back on time, but there's time for questions. Any questions?